Greetings everyone, my name is Cedric Chuuma from Financial Insight Zambia and welcome to this week's episode of the FIZ Show Season 2, the CEO series. Today I'm joined by the CEO and founder of Kleiner, Mr. Cuthbert Malindi. How are you doing, Mr. Cuthbert?
I'm doing fine. I'm really glad to be here. What we're going to talk about today, I know it's entrepreneurship as well as VC. Both are passions of mine. So I just wanted to say hi to everybody and looking forward to a lovely conversation.
It's a pleasure to have you, actually, such a legend in the game. So you are known as being a player in the investment space, in VC and in private equity. So what does the landscape look like for private equity and for venture capital, and what are some of the trends that you have identified?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. Something that I'm always talking about at these conferences that I attend. The overarching theme is that there has been an increase in VC flows, including private equity, into the African market from, if you like, the Western world, Europe, US, and we're seeing some of that also coming from the Middle East. But the truth of the matter is that if you look at the top 10 countries where this money is going, Zambia is not in the top 10, which is of concern to me and has been of concern for a while. Now, there are various reasons for that. I think, for those of us in the industry, when we look at what attracts capital, obviously it's your human capital. That's key for me. Your infrastructure, your macroeconomic stability of the country. And there are other reasons. The ecosystem, that's very important. And obviously the availability of deal flow. Zambia has lacked in a number of those areas. But having said that, we've certainly seen improvements. It's just that on a comparative basis, we're still lagging behind the top countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and now even Uganda and Tanzania. But we've seen some pockets of excellence. We've seen a couple of investments done in the fintech space. Lupia is a business woman-owned that I was involved in at the beginning, raising the first $1 million. We just heard recently they raised $8 million, so that's wonderful. And then there's another company, Premier Credit. So I think the fintech space, we've definitely seen flows. I'm the chairman of Jumo Zambia, although it's not necessarily a VC fund coming into the Zambian Jumo company. It's a group level, but I would still put it in the same category. So I think fintech has done very well. So in terms of trends, fintech has done very well. We haven't seen a lot in terms of logistics. There's been some investment in agri-tech. Again, that's an area where you can overlay technology on your traditional business.
And also from the increased inflows of capital into VC funds and PE funds on the continent, have you seen more participation from local institutional investors, or is it mostly high net worth individuals? And also with a new hub rising for venture capital, as well as just sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, have you seen them also participating in this growth on the African continent?
Right. Now, you see, private, I was lucky enough to be one of the pioneers of venture capital in Africa. I was in the group that set up Africa Venture Capital Association. The fund I worked for when I started my career, an American fund, I would actually say we were the first one to do real venture capital in Africa. Our mandate was SADC. The reason I'm saying that is that if you look at venture capital standard definition, and you can adapt it to Africa, in Africa, we're not really doing the venture capital as it was originally defined. So it is still a very risky area. And if we have time, I can explain why that's the case. So it's still a very risky area. So even though we're getting this sort of interest in Africa, Venture capital is still a small portion of that investment flow. I think last year Africa did a report, if I'm not mistaken, it was $5 million that came into VC. I need to check my figures. But the overall capital that flows into Africa is much bigger than that. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that it's still a nascent sector or type of investment in Africa for the reasons of risk that we all know about. So yes, there's been interest in Middle East. There's also, in Zambia, we've got a couple of innovation hubs, Bongo Hive and a few others. They've done some great work at the early stage, seed capital, but it's just a stage before venture capital. But for us to really attract VC the way Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa has done, I think we need to step up a little bit to make it more attractive.
Okay, and you've mentioned risks. So what are some of the business risks that you analyze before actually making an investment? What are some of the risks that are important for a VC to sort of tick when trying to look at an investment opportunity?
Okay. In fact, let me say venture capital by definition is risk capital. So yeah, naturally, when you look at potential investment in that sector, risk is extremely important. And projects, let me give you an example. Sometimes if you look at, I know companies, or I know fund managers, including some of them I'm involved. You can look at up to 100, 200, even 300 business plan a year and only invest in one or two. So I just wanted to preface my answer by saying that risk is a key element of what we do. Now the key risk for me, again, there's some debate as to which comes first. I think from my experience, I always look at operational risk first, which is really execution risk. What do I mean by that? It's looking at the management team, the founders, the composition, the competence, as well as the track record, as individuals as well as a group. Because what I would like to see is their ability to execute on the business model that they've presented. So by looking at that, I think you can pretty much kind of not price risk at this stage, but kind of have an opinion of whether this is the right management team or not. Of course, that's not a deal breaker. We're just looking at risk. The second one is market risk. Some people put market risk first for the simple reason that you've got to establish whether what the founder team or what the venture firm is presenting is a real problem. Because venture capital actually relies on the fact that you are trying to come up with a solution. Now it can be an invention or innovation. It doesn't have to be necessarily an invention. But you're trying to come up with a solution that addresses a problem. But the problem must be significant. It can't just be a vitamin. I like to give the analogy of a vitamin versus a Panadol. It has to be something that really, addresses the pain. Now, having said that, how big is the pain? How big is the problem? I.e., the definition of what I'm saying is really market. How big is the market? And what is your target market? What solution do you have? What competition? What gives you the competitive edge ahead of who else is providing a similar product or similar service, or if your product or your solution is brand new, in inverted commas, is there any other technology or any other solution that's trying to address the same problem? So market risks, as I said, some people put it first, because again, without a market, you can have the best product. Without a market, then there's no business. You can have a very good product without in fact, it reminds me of mobile money, the way mobile money started in Zambia. East Africa had established mobile money as almost an everyday thing. but it took a long time to get market acceptance in Zambia. So I think that's the example I would give. That so any business, one would have to look at that risk, because the risk there is that you might be early, you might have first move advantage, but if the market is not ready, your business won't fly. So that's market risk. The third one, of course, you can't run away from financial risk. With financial risk, we would look at, especially for early stage businesses, sometimes founders don't evaluate their cash needs very well. So one of the risks is that they may have they might have asked for less capital than they need. Because what you want to do is to make sure that the business has enough cash to survive to the next level, the next stage. In VC, we have definitions, and people can interpret the way they want. But you've got your pre-seed, you've got seed, you've got Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D. It can go up to E. So you want to make sure that at each stage, the company has raised enough capital to see them to the next stage. So you need to assess that. So that's what I mean by financial risk. But of course, the other traditional element of financial risk is that is it a business that's going to return what my required return is? Now, in VC, typically you're looking at 5, sometimes 10. In the US, they even go as crazy as 20 times invested money. So if I invest $1 million, are you going to give me back $5 or $10 million in 5 years' time? So that is the assessment that needs to be done. And therefore, you also then need to look at even the capital structure, how the business has been funded thus far, what the founders brought, if there's debt. So that's where you look at the financial risk.
My other question is about the importance of learning and intentional personal development for founders who are seeking investments. To what extent does this impact their investability, if you will, and how does this positively influence their ability to attract capital?
Right. I mean, that's these days, that's what I'm focused on, because, one thing I've realized, let me quickly say, when you look at what attracts capital, and I'll talk about Africa because that's what we're talking about, and Zambia specifically, it's really access. So it's capital. If you look at startup businesses, what they really need: access to capital, access to market, then access to infrastructure, then access to human capital. For me, I've flipped it. Human capital is actually number one. And that's why recently one of my businesses now is personal development and just the whole area of human behavior. Because I've realized, and many people have realized, that without the right mindset, you can have any business you want, you can have any product you want. Without the right mindset, you're unlikely to succeed. So I think having a robust mindset, and therefore this whole personal development, really developing the resilient side of you, is extremely important. So if I can go to your question, is that personally, and I'm not saying that every venture capitalist does this. Personally, that's why I put number one as human capital. For me, and I participate in a lot of kind of Dragon's Den type of programs. I sit on a number of investment committees. For me, I try and establish the tenacity, the resilience of the founder, just trying to understand their mindset and seeing whether as a person, as a human being, they are able to deliver what they say they're going to deliver. So I almost put the technical side aside. Yeah. So yes, I think if you were to ask me, I think that's a major thing in terms of a founder or a founder team attracting capital. Because that builds your resilience.
And also, you are not only an investor, but also an entrepreneur as well. Mm-hmm. This is quite unique, being on both sides of the table. But what unique perspective does this particular vantage point give you? Yeah,
so let me give you a quick reason why I wanted. I was privileged enough that when I started my career, late 20s actually, in VC, I was lucky enough to be sent to the US to go and train VC. I met a gentleman, his name was Pete Johnson. So a boy from Africa in an auditorium full of, I think, 4,000 people. When it was question time, I stood up and asked, said, what do I need to do in order to be an excellent venture capitalist or practitioner? And then he said to all of us, he said, if you've never run a business in your life, I'm not going to hire you. That, the pin dropped. Because I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur, and that validated that statement from Pete Johnson. He was 70. As I say, I was in my late 20s. That particular statement made me think that I need to become an entrepreneur, not just because I thought that was my calling, but also I thought that would actually make me a better investor and better venture capitalist. So that's really the genesis of it. That's where it came from. But I think what I've been doing this for almost 15 years over that. You'll be amazed what advantage that gives me. And advantage from the point of view that I'm able to tap into the mindset of the entrepreneur as well as the mindset of the investor.
Okay, also with regards to venture capital as well as private equity, there's always the question of exits, right? The time frame, I understand, is different for African investments as well as for American investments because of the various options for exits. For example, IPOs are particularly not very common on the African continent, but whereas on the American continent, as well as even Europe, it's quite common to have an exit planned out for that. So how do you plan around exits when you invest in African businesses, different to how they're done for American investors and Europeans as well?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question because, again, that has often been put forward as an obstacle to especially investors from the US investing in Africa because of the lack of liquidity, exits, and just the investment horizon. So it's still a challenge even now. It's not just Zambia. I'll give you a quick example, then I'll answer your question directly, is that, for example, one of my businesses, when I basically bought the business, put it together, I thought we would exit so I started my business in 2007. I brought in a private equity fund in 2011. And we thought we'd exit within 5 to 10 years because that was the investment horizon. But we just saw the business now in 2023. So that's like 15 years, almost. Wow. Yeah. So at a personal level, I've seen how difficult it is to exit. So yes, it's a big issue. But what normally we do right at the beginning of the investment, we ask that question. Again, this is where the founders or those raising money from VC or PE, they need to be wired that way to say, when you're going to ask for money, immediately think about the exit. Don't actually let the investor ask you, say, by the way, this is how I think you're going to exit, whether it's 5 years, 7 years. So you have to pre-plan. You have to have the foresight and the plan of how you're going to exit, the time horizon, and if certain parameters are not in place, what then? So usually we put in what we call self-liquidating instruments. You try and put in some debt. Obviously for VC is not ideal, but you try and build in some debt so that at least you get some cash out. So it could be a combination of equity and debt. Then there's what we call put option in the agreement where you can put the shares back to the founders and owners. So you put the owners on them. But to be fair to Africa and Zambia, I mean, I've just given an example of my business. You do have some strategic investors, especially now, who would, for example, in our case, a fintech would buy another fintech. So you don't necessarily have to have a secondary funding from another VC. So strategic, what we call trade sales. Trade sales are the most common most of the continent. South Africa has got a bit of an advantage because they've got a very established stock exchange, but even them it's not easy. So trade sale would be your most common, but as a VC, I'll try and build in some liquidated aspects in whatever investment. So for example, some venture capitalists would put in a pref share instrument rather than ordinary equity, so that because that gives you the time horizon by which you should exit, but also there might be a coupon built into that.
Okay, and take it, this trade share is basically your mergers and your acquisitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of mergers and acquisitions, we've seen M&A activity increase on the African continent. Recently, we had the deal of Chipacas purchasing Zona and integrating them as well. So what do you say for enterprises out there that are looking to an exit or even to growing into new markets? Is the environment for mergers and acquisitions improving and taking on more deals? Is the deal flow improving? And also a follow-up to that, how do you see the integration of the legal aspect of mergers and acquisition on the African continent?
Okay. I think if you look at what's happening in Africa, consolidation obviously it's a trend. You just mentioned Zona. Especially in the fintech space, if you look, there are so many players. That's why I said earlier that technology has almost become commoditized. So there's a lot of activity where there's consolidation, obviously the big players buying the smaller players. In fact, as a smaller player, you have to decide whether you want to fight the big guys or you want to be swallowed by the big guys. So there will always be opportunities for mergers and acquisition. And that's why, going back to my earlier answer, for me, what I would advise, there are two types of entrepreneurs. There's an entrepreneur, obviously, who wants to have a lifestyle business, although I don't call that an entrepreneur, they're more business owners. But for those who see the exit, the realization of their sweat equity, if I can put it that way, as exit as the mechanism to get paid, even when you start, you've got to have mergers and acquisitions, in your mind. So you've already got to start looking for potential suitors. For example, the example you gave with Zona, I worked with Zona for a long time. Even when when I say we had partnership, I used to always think about, should we acquire Zona or should we be acquired by Zona? So you've always got to have that as an entrepreneur in your mind.
And what unique approach do you have towards investing? Do you have a particular investment thesis among some of the businesses you look at, or particular theology or theory that you follow when investing in businesses?
I tend to go for execution and market risk. So I don't like to invest in startups. There was a time I was an angel investor. I lost quite a bit of money. So I think for me it's really post MVP. Because I think the reason I'm saying execution and market risk, at least you've proved that your product, your solution works. You've made some sales, so it post revenue. So what I mean by execution risk is that I'm betting on the management team. What I said earlier. If so, I look at the management team. If I'm satisfied, then I can invest in that, even though the product may little be a suspect. On the other side, market, again, that's big. So the two for me are the ones that I really look at.
And also it's very much a skills-driven sector, right? So what has been some of your challenges with regards to acquiring the right skills, both in your entrepreneurial ventures as well as in your venture capital activities, as well as deploying that skilled labor in your particular endeavors?
In fact, if anybody was to ask me, I think human capital human development, we really ignored that. A lot of businesses actually fail for two reasons, in my opinion. One is the people, and secondly is corporate governance. And I say this as somebody who has sat on several boards throughout Africa. I've often found that the product is not a problem. Sometimes even the market is not a problem. But it's the people and corporate governance. And the two, by the way, are linked. And sometimes it's not that people want to flout corporate governance. It's because they haven't been trained. We haven't skilled people in the right way of say, how do you run a business? So really management skills, business skills, and that's what I'm focusing on. Earlier on, I talked about robust mindset. We ignore how much that actually means to a business.
And what do you have to say about how, any recommendations for how Zambia can develop a competitive enterprise ecosystem?
Yeah, government right at the top. Look, that through the education, say free education, yeah, that's the start. But if you look at the countries where, let me just capture by saying investments. I was going to say VC, but investments in general, and also entrepreneurs where they've succeeded. Forget America, put it on one side for a moment. If you look at Israel, if you look at India, if you look at even Rwanda, what's happening in Rwanda, to a certain extent South Africa, government has been at the core of the development of entrepreneurs as well as venture capital. It's missing here. I can't hide that.
Oh, Mr. Malindi, it's been a pleasure. It's been very, very enlightening. And thank you so much for being part of this show.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I really enjoyed our discussion. I hope, my challenge to everybody really, especially those players I've just mentioned, that let's work together. I was going to say let's make Zambia great again, but I don't know if we've been great before. But we can do better than this. We are 25, I think 20 or 25 billion dollar GDP. For me, that's embarrassing. I mean, we're growing at 3 or 4%, even less. That's embarrassing. Personally, if you ask me, Zambia should be a 60, 70 billion dollar economy. We should be growing at 8, 9%. Of course, some of these are legacy problems, so I'm not necessarily blaming the current government. No, that's not what I'm saying. But if you look at the late Mwanawasa years when he was president, we were growing at 8%, 7%, 8%. We need to get back to that. But to do that, the engine is SME. So I hope we're going to carry on with these discussions at various fora, but I'm really appreciative that you invited me to speak to you. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. This has been Cedric Chuuma for Financial Insight Zambia. Get to know.